The new god of the Perfectibilist. The new gods of the Perfectibilist. The new god of the Perfectibilist. The new goddess of the Perfectibilist. The new goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The new goddess of the Perfectibilist. The old god of the Perfectibilist. The old gods of the Perfectibilist. The old god of the Perfectibilist. The old goddess of the Perfectibilist. The old goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The old goddess of the Perfectibilist. The greater god of the Perfectibilist. The greater gods of the Perfectibilist. The greater god of the Perfectibilist. The greater goddess of the Perfectibilist. The greater goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The greater goddess of the Perfectibilist. The lesser god of the Perfectibilist. The lesser gods of the Perfectibilist. The lesser god of the Perfectibilist. The lesser goddess of the Perfectibilist. The lesser goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The lesser goddess of the Perfectibilist. The higher god of the Perfectibilist. The higher gods of the Perfectibilist. The higher god of the Perfectibilist. The higher goddess of the Perfectibilist. The higher goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The higher goddess of the Perfectibilist. The lower god of the Perfectibilist. The lower gods of the Perfectibilist. The lower god of the Perfectibilist. The lower goddess of the Perfectibilist. The lower goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The lower goddess of the Perfectibilist. The greater spirit of the Perfectibilist. The greater spirits of the Perfectibilist. The greater spirit of the Perfectibilist. The lesser spirit of the Perfectibilist. The lesser spirits of the Perfectibilist. The lesser spirit of the Perfectibilist. The higher spirit of the Perfectibilist. The higher spirits of the Perfectibilist. The higher spirit of the Perfectibilist. The lower spirit of the Perfectibilist. The lower spirits of the Perfectibilist. The lower spirit of the Perfectibilist. The major god of the Perfectibilist. The major gods of the Perfectibilist. The major god of the Perfectibilist. The major goddess of the Perfectibilist. The major goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The major goddess of the Perfectibilist. The minor god of the Perfectibilist. The minor gods of the Perfectibilist. The minor god of the Perfectibilist. The minor goddess of the Perfectibilist. The minor goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The minor goddess of the Perfectibilist. The superior god of the Perfectibilist. The superior gods of the Perfectibilist. The superior god of the Perfectibilist. The superior goddess of the Perfectibilist. The superior goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The superior goddess of the Perfectibilist. The inferior god of the Perfectibilist. The inferior gods of the Perfectibilist. The inferior god of the Perfectibilist. The inferior goddess of the Perfectibilist. The inferior goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The inferior goddess of the Perfectibilist. The ancestor god of the Perfectibilist. The ancestor gods of the Perfectibilist. The ancestor god of the Perfectibilist. The ancestor goddess of the Perfectibilist. The ancestor goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The ancestor goddess of the Perfectibilist. The ascendant god of the Perfectibilist. The ascendant gods of the Perfectibilist. The ascendant god of the Perfectibilist. The ascendant goddess of the Perfectibilist. The ascendant goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The ascendant goddess of the Perfectibilist. The descendant god of the Perfectibilist. The descendant gods of the Perfectibilist. The descendant god of the Perfectibilist. The descendant goddess of the Perfectibilist. The descendant goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The descendant goddess of the Perfectibilist. The transcendent god of the Perfectibilist. The transcendent gods of the Perfectibilist. The transcendent god of the Perfectibilist. The transcendent goddess of the Perfectibilist. The transcendent goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The transcendent goddess of the Perfectibilist. The past god of the Perfectibilist. The past gods of the Perfectibilist. The past god of the Perfectibilist. The past goddess of the Perfectibilist. The past goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The past goddess of the Perfectibilist. The present god of the Perfectibilist. The present gods of the Perfectibilist. The present god of the Perfectibilist. The present goddess of the Perfectibilist. The present goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The present goddess of the Perfectibilist. The future god of the Perfectibilist. The future gods of the Perfectibilist. The future god of the Perfectibilist. The future goddess of the Perfectibilist. The future goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The future goddess of the Perfectibilist. The authentic god of the Perfectibilist. The authentic gods of the Perfectibilist. The authentic god of the Perfectibilist. The authentic goddess of the Perfectibilist. The authentic goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The authentic goddess of the Perfectibilist. The synthetic god of the Perfectibilist. The synthetic gods of the Perfectibilist. The synthetic god of the Perfectibilist. The synthetic goddess of the Perfectibilist. The synthetic goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The synthetic goddess of the Perfectibilist. The progressive god of the Perfectibilist. The progressive gods of the Perfectibilist. The progressive god of the Perfectibilist. The progressive goddess of the Perfectibilist. The progressive goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The progressive goddess of the Perfectibilist. The regressive god of the Perfectibilist. The regressive gods of the Perfectibilist. The regressive god of the Perfectibilist. The regressive goddess of the Perfectibilist. The regressive goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The regressive goddess of the Perfectibilist. The ordinary god of the Perfectibilist. The ordinary gods of the Perfectibilist. The ordinary god of the Perfectibilist. The ordinary goddess of the Perfectibilist. The ordinary goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The ordinary goddess of the Perfectibilist. The extraordinary god of the Perfectibilist. The extraordinary gods of the Perfectibilist. The extraordinary god of the Perfectibilist. The extraordinary goddess of the Perfectibilist. The extraordinary goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The extraordinary goddess of the Perfectibilist. The static god of the Perfectibilist. The static gods of the Perfectibilist. The static god of the Perfectibilist. The static goddess of the Perfectibilist. The static goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The static goddess of the Perfectibilist. The dynamic god of the Perfectibilist. The dynamic gods of the Perfectibilist. The dynamic god of the Perfectibilist. The dynamic goddess of the Perfectibilist. The dynamic goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The dynamic goddess of the Perfectibilist. The land god of the Perfectibilist. The land gods of the Perfectibilist. The land god of the Perfectibilist. The land goddess of the Perfectibilist. The land goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The land goddess of the Perfectibilist. The sea god of the Perfectibilist. The sea gods of the Perfectibilist. The sea god of the Perfectibilist. The sea goddess of the Perfectibilist. The sea goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The sea goddess of the Perfectibilist. The sky god of the Perfectibilist. The sky gods of the Perfectibilist. The sky god of the Perfectibilist. The sky goddess of the Perfectibilist. The sky goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The sky goddess of the Perfectibilist. The god of the Perfectibilist. The gods of the Perfectibilist. The god of the Perfectibilist. The goddess of the Perfectibilist. The goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The goddess of the Perfectibilist. The half god of the Perfectibilist. The half gods of the Perfectibilist. The half god of the Perfectibilist. The half goddess of the Perfectibilist. The half goddesses of the Perfectibilist. The half goddess of the Perfectibilist. The vessel of the Perfectibilist. The vessels of the Perfectibilist. The vessel of the Perfectibilist. The name of the Perfectibilist. The names of the Perfectibilist. The name of the Perfectibilist. The person of the Perfectibilist. The persons of the Perfectibilist. The person of the Perfectibilist. The persona of the Perfectibilist. The personas of the Perfectibilist. The persona of the Perfectibilist. The personage of the Perfectibilist. The personages of the Perfectibilist. The personage of the Perfectibilist. The personality of the Perfectibilist. The personalities of the Perfectibilist. The personality of the Perfectibilist. The personification of the Perfectibilist. The personifications of the Perfectibilist. The personification of the Perfectibilist. The image of the Perfectibilist. The images of the Perfectibilist. The image of the Perfectibilist. The imagination of the Perfectibilist. The imaginations of the Perfectibilist. The imagination of the Perfectibilist. The belief of the Perfectibilist. The beliefs of the Perfectibilist. The belief of the Perfectibilist. The thought of the Perfectibilist. The thoughts of the Perfectibilist. The thought of the Perfectibilist. The word of the Perfectibilist. The words of the Perfectibilist. The word of the Perfectibilist. The action of the Perfectibilist. The actions of the Perfectibilist. The action of the Perfectibilist. The reaction of the Perfectibilist. The reactions of the Perfectibilist. The reaction of the Perfectibilist. The feeling of the Perfectibilist. The feelings of the Perfectibilist. The feeling of the Perfectibilist. The situation of the Perfectibilist. The situations of the Perfectibilist. The situation of the Perfectibilist. The circumstance of the Perfectibilist. The circumstances of the Perfectibilist. The circumstance of the Perfectibilist. The environment of the Perfectibilist. The environments of the Perfectibilist. The environment of the Perfectibilist. The relationship of the Perfectibilist. The relationships of the Perfectibilist. The relationship of the Perfectibilist. The number of the Perfectibilist. The numbers of the Perfectibilist. The number of the Perfectibilist. The formula of the Perfectibilist. The formulas of the Perfectibilist. The formula of the Perfectibilist. The equation of the Perfectibilist. The equations of the Perfectibilist. The equation of the Perfectibilist. The theory of the Perfectibilist. The theories of the Perfectibilist. The theory of the Perfectibilist. The symbol of the Perfectibilist. The symbols of the Perfectibilist. The symbol of the Perfectibilist. The color of the Perfectibilist. The colors of the Perfectibilist. The color of the Perfectibilist. The thing of the Perfectibilist. The things of the Perfectibilist. The thing of the Perfectibilist. The way of the Perfectibilist. The ways of the Perfectibilist. The way of the Perfectibilist. The place of the Perfectibilist. The places of the Perfectibilist. The place of the Perfectibilist. The time of the Perfectibilist. The times of the Perfectibilist. The time of the Perfectibilist. The event of the Perfectibilist. The events of the Perfectibilist. The event of the Perfectibilist. The result of the Perfectibilist. The results of the Perfectibilist. The result of the Perfectibilist. The crown of the Perfectibilist. The crowns of the Perfectibilist. The crown of the Perfectibilist. The throne of the Perfectibilist. The thrones of the Perfectibilist. The throne of the Perfectibilist. The Perfectibilist king. The Perfectibilist kings. The Perfectibilist kingdom. The Perfectibilist kingdoms. The Perfectibilist king subject. The Perfectibilist king subjects. The Perfectibilist king's dominion. The Perfectibilist king's dominions. The kingdom of the Perfectibilist. The kingdoms of the Perfectibilist. The kingdom of the Perfectibilist. The Perfectibilist queen. The Perfectibilist queens. The Perfectibilist queendom. The Perfectibilist queendoms. The Perfectibilist queen subject. The Perfectibilist queen subjects. The Perfectibilist queen's dominion. The Perfectibilist queen's dominions. The queendom of the Perfectibilist. The queendoms of the Perfectibilist. The queendom of the Perfectibilist. The Perfectibilist prince. The Perfectibilist princes. The Perfectibilist princedom. The Perfectibilist princedoms. The Perfectibilist prince's subject. The Perfectibilist prince's subjects. The Perfectibilist prince's dominion. The Perfectibilist prince's dominions. The princedom of the Perfectibilist. The princedoms of the Perfectibilist. The princedom of the Perfectibilist. The Perfectibilist princess. The Perfectibilist princesses. The Perfectibilist princessdom. The Perfectibilist princessdoms. The Perfectibilist princess's subject. The Perfectibilist princess's subjects. The Perfectibilist princess's dominion. The Perfectibilist princess's dominions. The princessdom of the Perfectibilist. The princessdoms of the Perfectibilist. The princessdom of the Perfectibilist. The lord of the Perfectibilist. The lords of the Perfectibilist. The lord of the Perfectibilist. The lordess of the Perfectibilist. The lordesses of the Perfectibilist. The lordess of the Perfectibilist. The priest of the Perfectibilist. The priests of the Perfectibilist. the priest of the Perfectibilist, the priestess of the Perfectibilist, the priestesses of the Perfectibilist, the priestess of the Perfectibilist, the ritual of the Perfectibilist, the rituals of the Perfectibilist, the ritual of the Perfectibilist, the shrine of the Perfectibilist, the shrines of the Perfectibilist, the shrine of the Perfectibilist, the temple of the Perfectibilist, the temples of the Perfectibilist, the temple of the Perfectibilist, the leader of the Perfectibilist, the leaders of the Perfectibilist, the leader of the Perfectibilist, the follower of the Perfectibilist, the followers of the Perfectibilist, the follower of the Perfectibilist, the natural substance of the Perfectibilist, the natural substances of the Perfectibilist, the natural substance of the Perfectibilist, the supernatural substance of the Perfectibilist, the supernatural substances of the Perfectibilist, the supernatural substance of the Perfectibilist, the temporal substance of the Perfectibilist, the temporal substances of the Perfectibilist, the temporal substance of the Perfectibilist, the spiritual substance of the Perfectibilist, the spiritual substances of the Perfectibilist, the spiritual substance of the Perfectibilist, the natural form of the Perfectibilist, the natural forms of the Perfectibilist, the natural form of the Perfectibilist, the supernatural form of the Perfectibilist, the supernatural forms of the Perfectibilist, the supernatural form of the Perfectibilist, the temporal form of the Perfectibilist, the temporal forms of the Perfectibilist, the temporal form of the Perfectibilist, the spiritual form of the Perfectibilist, the spiritual forms of the Perfectibilist, the spiritual form of the Perfectibilist, the age of the Perfectibilist, the ages of the Perfectibilist, the age of the Perfectibilist, the era of the Perfectibilist, the eras of the Perfectibilist, the era of the Perfectibilist, the awakener of the Perfectibilist, the awakeners of the Perfectibilist, the awakener of the Perfectibilist, the awakening of the Perfectibilist, the awakenings of the Perfectibilist, the awakening of the Perfectibilist, the realm of the Perfectibilist, the realms of the Perfectibilist, the realm of the Perfectibilist, the dimension of the Perfectibilist, the dimensions of the Perfectibilist, the dimension of the Perfectibilist, the zone of the Perfectibilist, the zones of the Perfectibilist, the zone of the Perfectibilist, the frequency of the Perfectibilist, the frequencies of the Perfectibilist, the frequency of the Perfectibilist, the century of the Perfectibilist, the centuries of the Perfectibilist, the century of the Perfectibilist, the millennium of the Perfectibilist, the millenniums of the Perfectibilist, the millennium of the Perfectibilist, the purpose of the Perfectibilist, the purposes of the Perfectibilist, the purpose of the Perfectibilist, the meaning of the Perfectibilist, the meanings of the Perfectibilist, the meaning of the Perfectibilist, the culture of the Perfectibilist, the cultures of the Perfectibilist, the culture of the Perfectibilist, the demonstrator of the Perfectibilist, the demonstrators of the Perfectibilist, the demonstrator of the Perfectibilist, the demonstration of the Perfectibilist, the demonstrations of the Perfectibilist, the demonstration of the Perfectibilist, the manifester of the Perfectibilist, the manifestors of the Perfectibilist, the manifester of the Perfectibilist, the manifestation of the Perfectibilist, the manifestations of the Perfectibilist, the manifestation of the Perfectibilist, the presence of the Perfectibilist, the presences of the Perfectibilist, the presence of the Perfectibilist, the glow of the Perfectibilist, the glows of the Perfectibilist, the glow of the Perfectibilist, the goal of the Perfectibilist, the goals of the Perfectibilist, the goal of the Perfectibilist, the plan of the Perfectibilist, the plans of the Perfectibilist, the plan of the Perfectibilist, the book of the Perfectibilist, the books of the Perfectibilist, the book of the Perfectibilist, the philosopher of the Perfectibilist, the philosophers of the Perfectibilist, the philosopher of the Perfectibilist, the philosophy of the Perfectibilist, the philosophies of the Perfectibilist, the philosophy of the Perfectibilist, the releaser of the Perfectibilist, the releasers of the Perfectibilist, the releaser of the Perfectibilist, The release of the Perfectibilist. The releases of the Perfectibilist. The release of the Perfectibilist. The variable of the Perfectibilist. The variables of the Perfectibilist. The variable of the Perfectibilist. The cause of the Perfectibilist. The causes of the Perfectibilist. The cause of the Perfectibilist. The effect of the Perfectibilist. The effects of the Perfectibilist. The effect of the Perfectibilist. The journey of the Perfectibilist. The journeys of the Perfectibilist. The journey of the Perfectibilist. The emergence of the Perfectibilist. The emergences of the Perfectibilist. The emergence of the Perfectibilist. The source of the Perfectibilist. The sources of the Perfectibilist. The source of the Perfectibilist. The originator of the Perfectibilist. The originators of the Perfectibilist. The originator of the Perfectibilist. The origin of the Perfectibilist. The origins of the Perfectibilist. The origin of the Perfectibilist. The forefather of the Perfectibilist. The forefathers of the Perfectibilist. The forefather of the Perfectibilist. The foremother of the Perfectibilist. The foremothers of the Perfectibilist. The foremother of the Perfectibilist. The ancestor of the Perfectibilist. The ancestors of the Perfectibilist. The ancestor of the Perfectibilist. The descendant of the Perfectibilist. The descendants of the Perfectibilist. The descendant of the Perfectibilist. The lineage of the Perfectibilist. The lineages of the Perfectibilist. The lineage of the Perfectibilist. The heritage of the Perfectibilist. The heritages of the Perfectibilist. The heritage of the Perfectibilist. The heir of the Perfectibilist. The heirs of the Perfectibilist. The heir of the Perfectibilist. The co-heir of the Perfectibilist. The co-heirs of the Perfectibilist. The co-heir of the Perfectibilist. The joint heir of the Perfectibilist. The joint heirs of the Perfectibilist. The joint heir of the Perfectibilist. The dynasty of the Perfectibilist. The dynasties of the Perfectibilist. The dynasty of the Perfectibilist. The force of the Perfectibilist. The forces of the Perfectibilist. The force of the Perfectibilist. The law of the Perfectibilist. The laws of the Perfectibilist. The law of the Perfectibilist. The pact of the Perfectibilist. The pacts of the Perfectibilist. The pact of the Perfectibilist. The game of the Perfectibilist. The games of the Perfectibilist. The game of the Perfectibilist. The mask of the Perfectibilist. The masks of the Perfectibilist. The mask of the Perfectibilist. The armor of the Perfectibilist. The armors of the Perfectibilist. The armor of the Perfectibilist. The sword of the Perfectibilist. The swords of the Perfectibilist. The sword of the Perfectibilist. The shield of the Perfectibilist. The shields of the Perfectibilist. The shield of the Perfectibilist. The force shield of the Perfectibilist. The force shields of the Perfectibilist. The force shield of the Perfectibilist. The armored force shield of the Perfectibilist. The armored force shields of the Perfectibilist. The armored force shield of the Perfectibilist. The champion of the Perfectibilist. The champions of the Perfectibilist. The champion of the Perfectibilist. The guardian of the Perfectibilist. The guardians of the Perfectibilist. The guardian of the Perfectibilist. The defender of the Perfectibilist. The defenders of the Perfectibilist. The defender of the Perfectibilist. The protector of the Perfectibilist. The protectors of the Perfectibilist. The protector of the Perfectibilist. The chant of the Perfectibilist. The chants of the Perfectibilist. The chant of the Perfectibilist. The shape of the Perfectibilist. The shapes of the Perfectibilist. The shape of the Perfectibilist. The cube of the Perfectibilist. The cubes of the Perfectibilist. The cube of the Perfectibilist. The cuboid of the Perfectibilist. The cuboids of the Perfectibilist. The cuboid of the Perfectibilist. The sphere of the Perfectibilist. The spheres of the Perfectibilist. The sphere of the Perfectibilist. The spheroid of the Perfectibilist. The spheroids of the Perfectibilist. The spheroid of the Perfectibilist. The prism of the Perfectibilist. The prisms of the Perfectibilist. The prism of the Perfectibilist. The pyramid of the Perfectibilist. The pyramids of the Perfectibilist. The pyramid of the Perfectibilist. The cylinder of the Perfectibilist. The cylinders 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 of the Perfectibilist. The cylinder of the Perfectibilist. The cone of the Perfectibilist. The cones of the Perfectibilist. The cone of the Perfectibilist. The triangle of the Perfectibilist. The triangles of the Perfectibilist. The triangle of the Perfectibilist. The circle of the Perfectibilist. The circles of the Perfectibilist. The circle of the Perfectibilist. The semicircle of the Perfectibilist. The semicircles of the Perfectibilist. The semicircle of the Perfectibilist. The square of the Perfectibilist. The squares of the Perfectibilist. The square of the Perfectibilist. The rectangle of the Perfectibilist. The rectangles of the Perfectibilist. The rectangle of the Perfectibilist. The parallelogram of the Perfectibilist. The parallelograms of the Perfectibilist. The parallelogram of the Perfectibilist. The rhombus of the Perfectibilist. The rhombuses of the Perfectibilist. The rhombus of the Perfectibilist. The trapezoid of the Perfectibilist. The trapezoids of the Perfectibilist. The trapezoid of the Perfectibilist. The polygon of the Perfectibilist. The polygons of the Perfectibilist. The polygon of the Perfectibilist. The pentagon of the Perfectibilist. The pentagons of the Perfectibilist. The pentagon of the Perfectibilist. The hexagon of the Perfectibilist. The hexagons of the Perfectibilist. The hexagon of the Perfectibilist. The septagon of the Perfectibilist. The septagons of the Perfectibilist. The septagon of the Perfectibilist. The octagon of the Perfectibilist. The octagons of the Perfectibilist. The octagon of the Perfectibilist. The nonagon of the Perfectibilist. The nonagons of the Perfectibilist. The nonagon of the Perfectibilist. The decagon of the Perfectibilist. The decagons of the Perfectibilist. The decagon of the Perfectibilist. The evolution of the Perfectibilist. The evolutions of the Perfectibilist. The evolution of the Perfectibilist. The revolution of the Perfectibilist. The revolutions of the Perfectibilist. The revolution of the Perfectibilist. The elemental art of the Perfectibilist. The elemental arts of the Perfectibilist. The elemental art of the Perfectibilist. The elemental science of the Perfectibilist. The elemental sciences of the Perfectibilist. The elemental science of the Perfectibilist. The elemental principle of the Perfectibilist. The elemental principles of the Perfectibilist. The elemental principle of the Perfectibilist. The elemental technology of the Perfectibilist. The elemental technologies of the Perfectibilist. The elemental technology of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental art of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental arts of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental art of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental science of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental sciences of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental science of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental principle of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental principles of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental principle of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental technology of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental technologies of the Perfectibilist. The low elemental technology of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental art of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental arts of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental art of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental science of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental sciences of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental science of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental principle of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental principles of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental principle of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental technology of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental technologies of the Perfectibilist. The high elemental technology of the Perfectibilist. The agent of the Perfectibilist. The agents of the Perfectibilist. The agent of the Perfectibilist. The agency of the Perfectibilist. The agencies of the Perfectibilist. The agency of the Perfectibilist. The amplifier of the Perfectibilist. The amplifiers of the Perfectibilist. The amplifier of the Perfectibilist. The amplification of the Perfectibilist. The amplifications of the Perfectibilist. The amplification of the Perfectibilist. The enhancer of the Perfectibilist. The enhancers of the Perfectibilist. The enhancer of the Perfectibilist. The enhancement of the Perfectibilist. The enhancements of the Perfectibilist. the enhancement of the Perfectibilist, the magnifier of the Perfectibilist, the magnifiers of the Perfectibilist, the magnifier of the Perfectibilist, the magnification of the Perfectibilist, the magnifications of the Perfectibilist, the magnification of the Perfectibilist, the influencer of the Perfectibilist, the influencers of the Perfectibilist, the influencer of the Perfectibilist, the influence of the Perfectibilist, the influences of the Perfectibilist, the influence of the Perfectibilist, the emanator of the Perfectibilist, the emanators of the Perfectibilist, the emanator of the Perfectibilist, the emanation of the Perfectibilist, the emanations of the Perfectibilist, the emanation of the Perfectibilist, the converger of the Perfectibilist, the convergers of the Perfectibilist, the converger of the Perfectibilist, the convergence of the Perfectibilist, the convergences of the Perfectibilist, the convergence of the Perfectibilist, the aura of the Perfectibilist, the auras of the Perfectibilist, the aura of the Perfectibilist, the impression of the Perfectibilist, the impressions of the Perfectibilist, the impression of the Perfectibilist, the intelligence of the Perfectibilist, the intelligences of the Perfectibilist, the intelligence of the Perfectibilist, the sophistication of the Perfectibilist, the sophistications of the Perfectibilist, the sophistication of the Perfectibilist, the genius of the Perfectibilist, the geniuses of the Perfectibilist, the genius of the Perfectibilist, the polymath of the Perfectibilist, the polymaths of the Perfectibilist, the polymath of the Perfectibilist, the psychic of the Perfectibilist, the psychics of the Perfectibilist, the psychic of the Perfectibilist, the knowledge of the Perfectibilist, the knowledges of the Perfectibilist, the knowledge of the Perfectibilist, the understanding of the Perfectibilist, the understandings of the Perfectibilist, the understanding of the Perfectibilist, the wisdom of the Perfectibilist, the wisdoms of the Perfectibilist, the wisdom of the Perfectibilist, the secret of the Perfectibilist, the secrets of the Perfectibilist, the secret of the Perfectibilist, the mystery of the Perfectibilist, the mysteries of the Perfectibilist, the mystery of the Perfectibilist, the revelation of the Perfectibilist, the revelations of the Perfectibilist, the revelation of the Perfectibilist, the tactic of the Perfectibilist, the tactics of the Perfectibilist, the tactic of the Perfectibilist, the strategy of the Perfectibilist, the strategies of the Perfectibilist, the strategy of the Perfectibilist, the strength of the Perfectibilist, the strengths of the Perfectibilist, the strength of the Perfectibilist, the might of the Perfectibilist, the might of the Perfectibilist, the might of the Perfectibilist, the power of the Perfectibilist, the powers of the Perfectibilist, the power of the Perfectibilist, the authority of the Perfectibilist, the authorities of the Perfectibilist, the authority of the Perfectibilist, the dominion of the Perfectibilist, the dominions of the Perfectibilist, the dominion of the Perfectibilist, the rhythm of the Perfectibilist, the rhythms of the Perfectibilist, the rhythm of the Perfectibilist, the melody of the Perfectibilist, the melodies of the Perfectibilist, the melody of the Perfectibilist, the music of the Perfectibilist, the musics of the Perfectibilist, the music of the Perfectibilist, the lyric of the Perfectibilist, the lyrics of the Perfectibilist, the lyric of the Perfectibilist, the song of the Perfectibilist, the songs of the Perfectibilist, the song of the Perfectibilist, the dance of the Perfectibilist, the dances of the Perfectibilist, the dance of the Perfectibilist, the spirit of the Perfectibilist, the spirits of the Perfectibilist, the spirit of the Perfectibilist, the soul of the Perfectibilist, the souls of the Perfectibilist, the soul of the Perfectibilist, the body of the Perfectibilist, the bodies of the Perfectibilist, the body of the Perfectibilist, the mark of the Perfectibilist, the marks of the Perfectibilist, the mark of the Perfectibilist, the promise of the Perfectibilist, the promises of the Perfectibilist, the promise of the Perfectibilist, the visionary of the Perfectibilist, the visionaries of the Perfectibilist, the visionary of the Perfectibilist, the vision of the Perfectibilist, the visions of the Perfectibilist, the vision of the Perfectibilist, the picture of the Perfectibilist, the pictures of the Perfectibilist, the picture of the Perfectibilist, the sound of the Perfectibilist, the sounds of the Perfectibilist, the sound of the Perfectibilist, the tongue of the Perfectibilist, the tongues of the Perfectibilist, the tongue of the Perfectibilist, the language of the Perfectibilist, the languages of the Perfectibilist, the language of the Perfectibilist, the communication of the Perfectibilist, the communications of the Perfectibilist, the communication of the Perfectibilist, the people of the Perfectibilist, the peoples of the Perfectibilist, the people of the Perfectibilist, the society of the Perfectibilist, the societies of the Perfectibilist, the society of the Perfectibilist, the fortress of the Perfectibilist, the fortresses of the Perfectibilist, the fortress of the Perfectibilist, the government of the Perfectibilist, the governments of the Perfectibilist, the government of the Perfectibilist, the city of the Perfectibilist, the cities of the Perfectibilist, the city of the Perfectibilist, the nation of the Perfectibilist, the nations of the Perfectibilist, the nation of the Perfectibilist, the civilization of the Perfectibilist, the civilizations of the Perfectibilist, the civilization of the Perfectibilist, the world of the Perfectibilist, the worlds of the Perfectibilist, the world of the Perfectibilist,